Hello everyone. In today's video, we will discuss the age of Chaucer. But before moving into Chaucer's period, I would like to mention a few points about the previous period, the Anglo-Norman period. So we know the Anglo-Norman period had began with the Norman conquest when William the Conqueror of Normandy conquered England. That is from where the Middle English period or the Anglo-Norman period begins. And then England had Henry II as its king. Now, it is important to know that during the reign of Henry II, there was a clash between the church and the state. I'm not going much into the details of it, but we have to understand that almost from this time onwards, there is a constant conflict between the church officials and the state, the king. And here we have Thomas Becket. You all are very familiar with Thomas Becket. Here we have Thomas Becket who stood against the king because the king wanted the supreme power. And the church, Thomas Becket wanted the church to be independent from the rule of the king. So there was a clash here. And the next king, Richard I, during his reign, his rule, we find that a lot of crusades takes place. So there was all these crusades from England. The explorers, travelers were all sent to Jerusalem, especially in order to conquer the Holy Land. And finally, we have King John, during whose rule Magna Carta came into existence. So, this was made by the barons. This is regarding the feudal system which existed then after the Norman conquest. So, this was brought by the barons to make sure that their rights were protected. So, these are some points we should remember from the Anglo Norman period. And the reason why I have mentioned this is that when we talked about the Anglo Norman period, we saw the society, the historic background of the society, and the social and cultural state of the society. And through these points, we understand that the society of England was going through a change. So, by the time Chaucer starts writing, the society of England had completely changed from what it was during the Anglo Norman period. For example, there is a conflict between the church and the state. And there are also crusades which is bringing in new knowledge, and a sense of nationalism has also emerged in England. And Magna Carta has began to bring down the feudal system which existed in England, bringing free societies. Now moving into Chaucer's period, let's see what were the important events that took place in the age of Chaucer. Firstly, we have the Hundred Years' War. Now, this war was fought between England and France. Now, again, we have to go back to the Anglo Norman period where William the Conqueror, who was the king of Normandy, came to England and conquered England. Now, after conquering England in the Battle of Hastings, William the Conqueror was ruling both England and Normandy. Now, many years had passed, and England had a lot of property in France. Many lands in France was in control of England. Now, slowly, you find that the French people, the French king, started to take back the lands which were in control of England. And finally, only one place called Gascony, which was a possession of England in France, remained. The French king tried to take back even this, the last piece of land which England owned in France. And during this time, Edward III was the king of England. So he found that all their properties were being taken by France, and seeing this, he took this as an opportunity and he started a war with France with the claim that he is supposed to be ruling both England and France. So he started a war not simply for Gascony, he started the war for the entire France. He started a war for the French throne. And thus we have a war beginning between England and France. So the war was for the French throne, especially for Gascony. And the war continued. It was not like the war stopped after the death of Edward III. The war continued for the reigns of five kings of England. And it is a war that took place for 116 years, but we call it the Hundred Years' War. Now, even though the initial battles were won by England, the final war was completely won by France. And Joan of Arc, you might have heard of Joan of Arc, she is from France, and she is thought to be a very important figure who helped in winning the Hundred Years of War, helped France in winning the war. Now, when England was busy fighting the Hundred Years of War in France, a plague was spreading in Europe. England had its crusades going on and the Hundred Years of War going on. And what happened is the people who went for all these, the ships that went to Europe for all these ships brought these plague infected mice into England. And soon Black Death or plague started to spread in England. And this killed almost one third of the England's population that time. We can equate this to the corona we had in 2020 with the exception that we had proper medical facilities, which England did not have at that time. And this resulted in the death of a lot of people. This famous nursery rhyme that we know, ring a roses, a pocket full of posies, achoo, achoo, we all fall down. It is a bit funny to say this in the video, but if you understand the real meaning of this rhyme, you understand how sad it is. The rhyme is related to the Black Death or plague. I'm sorry if I'm taking your valuable time, but I thought it would be good to explain what these lines mean. So, once a person is affected by this plague, there would be rings, rose colored patches on the skin. And the infected person, will also have a very bad smell. So, in order to hide the smell, people started to carry posies. Posies are flowers. So, they carried pocket full of posies, and this disease also led to a lot of sneezing. And soon people just started to die and fall down on the floor. So we all fall down. It has a very dark meaning to it. So Black Death was very frightening for them. And when this was happening, we find peasants' revolts in England. Now, one of the reasons for this is that because of the Black Death, already so many people had died. So there were labor shortages in all the lands. Cultivation could not go well because of the lack of labor. So, because of labor shortage due to the Black Death, and also since the 100 years of war is going on, high taxes were taken from the people. Now, in order to fight the war, you need resources. For the resources, the king started to take more taxes from his own people. So already there were no enough workers for working on the land. And along with that, now they had to pay more taxes too. And there was famine, the economy was down. All this frustration made these people to revolt against the king. So we have peasants' revolt taking place. Also, as I mentioned earlier, about the conflict between the church and the state. Already during Henry II's reign, there was a conflict between the king and Thomas Becket. And here we find that during the age of Chaucer, Reformation slowly starts to begin. By now, the church had become very corrupted. The clergy started to live very rich and polished lives, whereas the common people were struggling because of the 100 years of war, Black Death, and everything. So the corruption of church was questioned. And also now these people had new knowledge. They were going out for crusades, a lot of exploration and traveling were taking place. So new knowledge had come to England. And they also questioned the healing power of the church because one third of England's population were dying because of the Black Death and the plague. So now they started to question whether the church is capable of healing them. So during this period, the people started to understand that there should be a change in church, a reformation in church. So this slowly starts to take place during the age of Chaucer. So, this is what was happening in England during those times. So, there was the war happening, the 100 years of war taking place, Black Death and people dying. There were revolts, high taxes, corruption of the church. All these were taking place. A lot of things were happening in England then. And during this time, we have five important writers. When we talk about the age of Chaucer, these are the five important writers that we must know: Geoffrey Chaucer, William Langland, John Gower, John Wycliffe, and John Mandeville. We will for sure begin with Geoffrey Chaucer. Geoffrey Chaucer was born in London, and he was born to a good family. Good family in the sense his family was financially very sound. They enjoyed a very high position in London during those times. He lived during the reigns of three kings: Edward III, Richard II, and Henry IV. This is important. This is usually asked for exams, competitive exams. And also, Chaucer was the first poet to be buried in Westminster Abbey. Now it is known as the Poets' Corner. Because of Chaucer's influence on the British history, Chaucer is thought to be the father of English poetry. He is also sometimes called father of English literature, and he is also called morning star of Renaissance. And we can divide his literary career into three phases: the part where he has had his French influence, and then he had his Italian influence, and the period in which he wrote in Middle English, the Middle English period. And he is the one who popularized East Midland dialect. Before moving into the works of Chaucer, I would like to mention that Chaucer was a court poet. He was not a poet of the people. Even though all these problems were happening around him, Chaucer did not mention any of these in any of his works. You do get a glimpse of the society, the characters, and the people, but the problems faced by the society then were not properly or appropriately discussed by Chaucer. Maybe because, as I have told you before, Chaucer was in a financially well stable family. He did not have to face any of these problems. So maybe he did not seem to realize how important it is to talk about these problems in his works. Also, he was a person who had much influence in the court and with great important people of his society. So maybe he was simply trying to be on the safe side. But again, whether he has discussed these issues or not, he is a very important figure in the history of English literature because he used English language in his works and he had a variety of writing styles. We will first discuss the works which Chaucer wrote when he had an influence from France. Now, Chaucer had participated in the 100 Years of War and he was captured by the French army. Now, Chaucer was a very important person for England nobles that a high ransom, a very big ransom, was paid in order to bring back Chaucer from France. Anyway, in his early literary career, Chaucer was very much influenced by French literature. So let's discuss the important works of this period. The first work is The Romaunt of the Rose. The actual title is Les Romans de la Rose. Now, this work is not originally written by Chaucer. It was a translation of a French work from French to Middle English. And then we have the Book of Duchess. Now, this is a poem that Chaucer wrote to commemorate the death of Blanche of Lancaster, who was the wife of John Gaunt. John Gaunt was Chaucer's patron. He was the one who gave financial assistance to Chaucer for all these works that he is writing. And when his wife Blanche died, Chaucer wrote a poem to honor her death, to show respect to her death. Now let's discuss the Italian period, the second phase of Chaucer's career. Now, Chaucer was a person who traveled much. He has traveled a lot to Italy for court purposes, for the purposes of the king. He was sent to Italy several times. It is even said that he has met Dante, Boccaccio, and all these important Renaissance writers from Italy. Anyway, Chaucer was well read in Italian literature, just as how he had read French literature. The first work we'll discuss here is House of Fame, which in structure is very similar to the structure of Dante's Divine Comedy. The story in House of Fame is like a dream like vision, just like many other works of Chaucer. And the next work is Parliament of Fowls or Parliament of Birds. Now, this is also a dream vision work. This is a work in which the poet has a dream in which the birds are having a debate, a parliamentary debate, and they are having a discussion on love and marriage. And this probably could be the first work in which Valentine's Day is mentioned. Moving forward, we have Troilus and Crusade. Now, this is a retelling of the story of Troilus and Crusade and the Trojan War. The main influences or sources of this work is thought to be Homer's Iliad and Boccaccio's Il Filostrato. And it is also said that the phrase all good things must come to an end. This phrase might have originated from this work. And finally, from this period, we have the work Legend of Good Women, which is a work written by Chaucer about stories of famous women from history and mythology. Now, this work is mentioned in Canterbury Tales by the man of law or the sergeant of law. Moving forward to the English period, we have one very important work, the masterpiece written by Chaucer, the Canterbury Tales. Now, this is a story about a group of pilgrims, a group of 30 pilgrims, including Chaucer himself, who move from London to Canterbury in order to visit the shrine of Sir Thomas Becket. I've mentioned Sir Thomas Becket in the video before. We talked about the clash between the church and the state in the beginning of the Anglo Norman period, where Thomas Becket had a conflict with Henry II, the king. So it is that Thomas Becket we are talking about, who is now canonized to be a saint. And something interesting about the group of pilgrims is that the pilgrims, each one of them, represents a different class, a different category of people in the English society. So, this group of pilgrims is a representation of the society itself. And these people are moving from London to Canterbury, and on their way, they take rest, a night's rest in the Tabard Inn. And the host of the Tabard Inn tells them that they will conduct a storytelling competition in which each pilgrim has to say two stories on their way to Canterbury and two stories on their way back from Canterbury. So every person has to say four stories each. There are total 30 pilgrims, and if each of them says 4 stories, then there should be total 120 stories. But Chaucer was able to complete only 24 of the stories. A detailed explanation of this work will be provided in another video. The next writer whom we will discuss is William Langland. Unlike Chaucer, Langland lived a very poor life. He was poor and he had seen the miseries of poor. And so, his important work, Piers the Plowman, reflects the life of the poor people, the problems faced by them. This is a satirical work and it is also a Christian work. That is, there is a moral at the end of the work. It shows how a person should be living a good life, the importance of being a good Christian and the importance of being a good Samaritan. The setting of the story is Malvern Hill, and the poet is there and he falls asleep, and in his sleep he sees a vision. And in the vision he finds a tower. The tower symbolizes heaven. and then there is also a dungeon which symbolizes hell. In between the tower and the dungeon, there is a field which represents the world of people. Pius, the protagonist, he meets different characters. He meets three figurative characters: do well, do better, and do best. And in the end of the story, we find it is Pius who become the good Samaritan. Moving forward, the next person we should know about is John Wycliffe. Now, John Wycliffe was a Catholic priest, but he found that the church, the Catholic Church, is corrupted and it required to change. So he started to bring ideas of reformation, and thus he is called Morning Star of Reformation, and his followers are called Lollards. He has translated Bible into Middle English, which is a very important step that he took. Because till then, the Bible was written in Latin and only the clergy and the well-educated people were able to read and understand Bible. But now, since he has translated the Bible to Middle English, Bible became accessible to the common man. The next writer is John Madville. Now, he was a traveler. He has gone on many adventurous trips. He has explored a lot, and all his own explorations, his own travel stories and adventures, it's all written in the Travels of Sir John Mandeville. So, this gives us an insight about the trade and commerce and exploration of the people of England then. Finally, we have John Gower, who was also a friend of Geoffrey Chaucer. Now, Gower has written in all different languages: French, Latin, and Middle English. He may not have had the insight to stick to the Middle English language and see how much it would influence the world in the coming years. This could be the reason why Gower did not gain popularity like Chaucer. The three important works of Gower that we should know is The Mirror of Mankind, Vox Clamandus, and Confessio Amandus. The Mirror of Mankind is written in French, and Vox Clamandus is written in Latin. The third work, Confessio Amandus, is written in Middle English, and it was written on the request of Richard II. Now, here are a few features of the age of Chaucer. Firstly, a very important point regarding our English literature is that English language was standardized during the age of Chaucer. Writers started to use English, even the officials, the court officials, the government, the paperworks, the official language. English was made into all of these. And during the time of Chaucer, a sense of nationalism and pride, a national identity started to grow in England. Especially because of the Hundred Years' War, people started to feel that they all belong to the same country. And then we find the sense of curiosity and also criticism in the people. People were very curious to know about other places. A lot of explorations were taking place, and at the same time, with these explorations, they had new learning. They learned about a lot of things, and this led them to criticize what they already knew. They started to criticize the corruption in the church, their clergy, their ruling system, the feudal system, and so on. And we also find the rise of middle class during these times. Humanism became an important feature of this period, and the feudal system slowly ended. Again, in the beginning of the video, we had talked about King John and Magna Carta, where the barons, the nobles, wanted their rights for their lands. They did not want the king to have the complete authority on their lands. So all this slowly led to a decreased importance of feudal system, leading to free societies. And especially talking about literature, we find that the Midland dialect, which was the dialect of London, and the dialect which Chaucer used, gained a lot of prominence, and also a lot of prose works were written during the age of Chaucer. Earlier, too, even if prose works were written, it is usually not original, it would be only a translation. But in this period, we find prose works were originally written by the writers of England. With that, we come to an end of this discussion, the age of Chaucer. Chaucer and his Canterbury Tales is very important for students of English literature. We will discuss that in another video. If you have any more points to add about the age of Chaucer, please do mention in the comment section. I hope this video was useful to you. Thank you so much for watching.